Hello. So I'd like to talk a bit about grammar pedantry. I'm thinking basically about this sort of social phenomenon you find, particularly online, where some people take it on themselves to want to correct others grammatically over what mostly amounts to minor mistakes. Now, I actually come from a teaching background, you may or may not know, so you may think that I was someone who really cared about grammar and really focused on it. Well, look, of course, grammar is important. Without grammar, you would have no structure. You would have no um, rules for formatting the language. Grammar matters, obviously, and sometimes you do get people whose grammar is so off that you really can't comprehend what they're trying to say. I've had, particularly if they don't have English as a first language, and their English is not a high quality and it is so off that you really just can't comprehend the point they're trying to make. Um, and that applies to other languages as well. I imagine if you're really, I mean, that's why I never try to write in other languages because I think I'm at such an elementary stage in most other languages that I would embarrass myself. Um, So, there are times when people just aren't comprehensible. Um, when you're trying to make out what they're trying to say. In those situations, I think it's valid to ask them. But I do think that there is, I'll just say this from the outset, I do think there is a sort of snootiness, even snobbery about those who go around wanting to correct others' grammar. I think it's a little bit, well, I think it's unnecessary, and I think it is. It actually says more about their attitude to others than it does about the person's lack of correct grammar, in my opinion. Um, and there's been a little bit of a backlash against this. We've seen the pejorative grammar fascists describing those who, go out of their way to correct others. I really think that it's a real thing, and it does annoy people. So, if you're one of those people that you can only report to someone's comment that you disagree with, and this is something I've noticed as well. You get a contentious issue and someone replies to a comment, and instead of just countering their arguments and saying, "Well, I disagree because of this reason," they just pick up on grammar. And I think it's a little bit petty. I mean, there may be times it's kind of poetic justice. For example, if you get someone who's being a bit jingoistic and they're talking about how immigrants don't speak English well, and then they come out with a lot of grammar mistakes, then you could sort of see a poetic justice in calling them out on that. But generally, I really don't think that it's a valid counter. I think it just demonstrates the pettiness on the person who's doing it. Like they want to focus on minor grammar errors instead of the argument the person's making. Just because you have perfect grammar doesn't mean your argument is better. It doesn't mean that you have a more valid point. The way people communicate on a day-to-day basis, in oral English, we don't think about grammar. So why should it be such an obsession in written English? Now, don't get me wrong. Obviously, if a teacher was marking an exam paper, notwithstanding the big scandal we've had recently, but if a teacher's marking an exam paper, particularly, for example, in a literature class, something like that, then it would matter. Of course, it would matter. But I really think that the most important thing on a day-to-day basis is that language is credible. The language, both written and oral, is is comprehensible. That is the most important thing. So if someone's grammar is a little bit off. I've frequently disagreed with people, and I could very easily have taken them up on their lousy grammar, but I've chosen to focus on the arguments because I just think it doesn't make me better by saying, "Oh, well, my grammar's better." It doesn't make my argument any more valid. There are a few things that I notice that kind of annoy me a little bit, I guess. So, for example, when people forget to capitalize place names, um, that is something that is mildly irritating. But even then, I'm not going to go out of my way and correct them. I just think it's unnecessary. Um, so really, these grammar fascists need to get over themselves because they're not better than anyone else. Just because they think they've got perfect grammar and they may themselves not actually be getting it all entirely right. But really, if your whole way of communicating with other people is by calling out their mistakes, honestly, it says a lot more about you. That's my honest opinion. And if someone's trying to learn a language and they're trying their best and they make some mistakes, I don't see anything smart about putting them on the spot and calling them out for that. Um, and if it's a fellow English speaker, even then, maybe the person does have is less educated, but that doesn't mean that their argument is less valid. Um, okay, maybe they are not as informed about the subject, but it doesn't suddenly mean that their argument is not valid. I mean, I do think there's a little bit of an intellectual snobbery with this, a little bit. I'm not talking about when people make so many mistakes that's obvious, right? Because that is distracting. You can't read what they're saying. But when it's minor mistakes, like maybe a missing apostrophe or something, in a whole paragraph, I mean, really, you want to call that out? I would say to those people, just back off a little bit. Just don't take it so, don't make that such a focus. Focus on the arguments. Because if you're so confident that you're right, very often this is done from a point of trying to humiliate the other person. Well, if they're so um, confident that they're right, then they should come up with counter arguments instead of just focusing on minor grammar mistakes. I mean, I make grammar mistakes. I freely admit that. Sometimes I'm typing fast, typo. Um, and I think that, if people want to pick up things like that, honestly, I think they're saying more about themselves. Let me know your thoughts. Um, Summed up, yes, grammar is important. I don't want to be misunderstood. Of course, it's important, but I don't have much time for people who think that they are smart by calling others out. They think that that's a good counter. It just comes across as a little bit of, to me, a bit intellectually snobby.